Hi, welcome to my Sewing Summit class. I'm Tori James from Toriska Bags, and today I will be teaching you how to make two different types of pillow covers, or pillow shams. The first is a gathered style, and the second has pleats, and both of them have an envelope style back. You might be thinking that these are too tough for you as a beginner, but I will be walking you through how to gather, how to pleat, how to top stitch, and how to do French seams. And I assure you that these are very reasonable and they are appropriate for both beginners and experienced sewers. And the final result is gorgeous. So enjoy this class. First off, let's talk about fabric choice. For this version, I used polyester silk. It's pretty thin and it gathers easily. I also have some eyelet I'm going to use, and quilting cotton is perfect. You don't want to get this fabric too thick because then you will be having to gather all that really thick fabric and it'll be tough. So you want to stick with something thinner, at least for the front. If you want to have a sturdier fabric on the back, you can. For the pleated version, the most important part is that it takes a pleat, that it takes a crease when you iron it. Because if it's too loose and flowy, then you won't get these nice pleats. You'll also want to be cautious of the thickness because it gets pretty thick at this top seam with all this fabric if you don't have a very strong sewing machine. So you might not want to do a thick home decor fabric if your machine struggles with thickness. Next, let's talk about the dimensions of the pieces that you're going to cut out. I'm showing you how to make a cover for an 18-inch pillow. 18-inch square, but you can use this tutorial for any size of pillow, and I will give you instructions on how to adapt it for the different size of pillow. Now, this finished size is about 16 by 16 because you want your cover to be smaller than your pillow, and that'll make it a nice fluffy pillow. So first, your piece A for the gathered piece, you're going to cut it twice the length of your pillow insert. So for an 18 by 18 pillow insert, this is going to be 36 inches long. And I have all of the dimensions in centimeters and inches in the written pattern. So I will be speaking in inches, but you can look for the centimeters in the pattern. For your height, you're going to want it 1 inch taller than the height of your insert. And the reason why is as you gather it, it gets shorter and shorter. And so we're going to build in a little extra height. So this piece A is 36 inches long and 19 inches tall. Now you will need a backing piece, and this piece will not be showing, well, except for I'm using eyelet that has little holes, but generally it will not be showing. It'll be covered by the gathered piece A. And so this is the same size as your pillow insert. So this is 18 inches by 18 inches. One thing to remember is that because we're doing French seams, about 3/4 of an inch of this, close to 3/4 to an inch of these sides will be gone. So that's how it's going to end up much smaller because of the French seams. And your backing pieces. You will cut 2 of these, and they will be the same height as your insert, so 18 inches high. And for the width, you'll take half the width of your insert, which would make it 9 inches. Then we're going to add another 5 inches. 2 of that is for the hem on the back, and then another 3 is so that we can have an overlap on the back. So this creates about a 6-inch overlap. Now, if you are struggling to find yardage, you can make that overlap smaller, say 4 inches. So that would make this piece just an inch narrower. But I like to have a nice wide overlap on the back, especially because it's the cover is small, so it's fluffy, and so it'll pull on it. So this is made, if you cut it, this piece 18 inches tall by 14 inches wide, both of these back pieces, then it'll create a 6-inch overlap. Now for your pleated pillow, you have 4 pieces. You have your piece A, which is the pleats, piece B, which is the top, piece C, which is the bottom, and then the back for this I'm calling piece D. So piece A. First, you will need to figure out a couple of things. This one requires more math. And so I've done the math for you for this pleated, for this 18-inch pillow. If you want a different size pillow, then you're gonna have to do the math yourself. But I chose to have 4 pleats, and each pleat is 1 inch wide. So this is 4 inches of fabric right here, and 4 inches here, 4 inches here, and then the final version has a little half pleat on each side. This was one of my test versions. So for however many pleats you have, you need to add 4 inches. So 4, 4, 4, then you'll have 2 inches of pleat here and 2 inches of pleat there. So my pillow insert is 18 inches wide, and I want 4 pleats, so I'm going to add 16 inches to that. So this is 34 inches long. Now for the height, it's going to be folded in half, and you're going to have a 1/2 inch seam allowance up here. So I decided I wanted my pleat to be about 4 inches high, and so I multiplied 4 inches by 2, so this is 8 inches. Excuse me. And then I added 1 inch to account for that, because this is doubled up, 1/2 inch seam allowance at the top. So this is 34 inches wide and 9 inches tall. I have done this same design with a standard pillow cover, and it worked just as well. I think I did wider pleats, but it worked great. And then if you have a very long piece with lots of pleating, you can always piece together this piece and just have the seam for that hidden underneath one of these pleats. So your piece A and piece B, for these you will do some more math. So the width of both of these is going to be 18 inches for this thing, or the width of your pillow insert. And the height, what I did is I just did 2/3 of 18 is 12, plus 1/2 inch for the seam allowance here. So this is 12.5 inches tall. And this is 1/3 of 18, so this is 6 inches, plus 1/2 inch for the seam allowance. So 18 wide, 6.5 tall. And you can do that same ratio for any size pillowcase. If it doesn't easily divide into 3 like 18 does, then just round. So if this were for a 20-inch pillow insert, I would round it to 13 and 7. And finally, the back is the same as for the other pillow. It's the same height as the pillow insert, both pieces. So 18 inches high and 14 inches wide, which accounts for the 1 inch hem and 6 inches of overlap. And we are ready to sew. Okay, now you'll need to prepare your gathered piece for gathering. I like to gather every 2 inches, but you can change that if you want to have wider gathers, or if you have a different size where that doesn't work. And the space at the bottom and top should be a little bit bigger because there is going to be about 1 inch of that taken away for the seam allowance. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use pins. You can use chalk or washable markers as well. I'm going to use pins, which does take a little while, but it'll show up easily for you, so you can see what I'm doing. So what I'm going to do is put pins. I'm going to start up 2.5 inches from the bottom, and then I'm going to pin every 2 inches, which is a little tricky because I have eyelet fabric, so there's holes. I'm going to do that now. And if you're using a washable marker or chalk or something, you can just draw your lines right on the fabric with a ruler, or you can do what I'm doing and measure vertically and make marks that way. And at the top I also have 2.5 inches and I will keep making these marks, and then when I'm gathering, I will just sew from mark to mark. And that way I don't have to draw a line, but it's essentially a line of pins. This eyelet is a little bit tricky fabric to gather, but the reason I chose it is because I used this fabric on the curtains in my family room, and I decided to might as well make these pillows match my family room, so I'm using the extra fabric. Alright, we're now done marking our piece together, and we are ready to move on to the next step and sew the gathering stitches. First I will show you how to sew the top of the gathered pillow cover. Then I will show you how to sew the top of the pleated pillow cover. Then I will show you how to sew the back of each, which is the same for both styles, and how to sew the top and bottom together. So we're going to start with the gathered version. And also, first off, there's nothing like recording to make you realize how messed up your hands are. So sorry about all my little scabs and things. The winter sometimes wreaks havoc on my hands. Okay, first off, I'm going to increase my stitch length to about 4 or 4.5. 4 or 4.5 make a good gathering stitch. And I'm going to just start sewing straight lines. And I'm also going to sew a line about 1/2 inch from each edge. That I didn't pin that because you can just use the edge. And when you are sewing gathering stitches, you need to make sure you leave long enough tails on both sides. So we won't trim off the tails at the end, we'll leave long tails. And this can take a little while, so just get into a groove and just start sewing all these long gathering stitches. Okay, so I'll leave nice long tails. And now I'm going to start the next row. And I just use the, if you drew lines, you can just sew on your lines. If you drew little marks, just go from mark to mark. And if you used pins like me, try not to poke yourself with the pins. Alright, now I'm going to keep sewing, but I'm going to speed up the video so you don't have to watch every single line of stitching. we have now done all of our gathering stitches, and it is time to actually gather our fabric. One thing I forgot to mention is that it is important to mark the centers of each piece. So the center of the side and the center of the top, bottom, and the other side. So I'm going to go do that right now and mark each with a pin, and that'll make it easier in future steps. Okay, I made sure that the center was marked with a pin on each side, and I did the same thing for my backing fabric, and that'll be important. Alright, so when I am gathering, I start at the top. Make sure you're looking at your right side. My right side and wrong side look very similar, but it's a little different. So find one of your end threads and make sure you are pulling on the back stitch. And you can always look on the back of the fabric to see if you're pulling on the back or the front. So pull on the thread that's attached to the back and start pulling. Now you can pull, usually I pull about a quarter of the way or half the way to the center mark, but you can also go all the way to the center. And you just try to make it about half the width it was before. Then we go down to our next set of stitching and do the same thing. And I'm going to gather up to that center point. I try to make sure it's gathered about the same amount, but that can all be adjusted later. Then I go to my third line. This part can get tedious, but the end result is really pretty. Now that we've finished pulling from that side, we go to the other side. Now we're gonna pull on these back threads all the way over to this center mark where we left off gathering on the other side. It can get a little confusing with all of these tails on each side. So just make sure you are keeping track of what's the top side and the bottom side, and then pulling on the bottom threads. Sometimes you have to untangle the thread at the edge a little bit in order to tell what's the top and what's the bottom. Okay, I'm now finished gathering this. It's about half the width as it was before, but we will adjust that as necessary to make our gathers as uniform as possible. So this is a little easier if you have it on a flat surface, but I will try to do it over here, and I'll move my camera. Okay, I am going to match up the center marks on the bottom and the top, and I'm going to make sure my right side is up and my wrong side is down towards the backing. Try to make sure these little tails don't get stuck underneath. Looks like I might have gotten a little overeager with how I gathered these, so I'm just going to pull on these gathers until I have widened it a little bit. I'm going to pin this all the way across the edge. One thing I forgot to mention is that on these gathering stitches, it's good to use a coordinating thread because these will show. But I used a gray thread because I didn't have a perfect match for this blue, and I wanted it to show up in the video a little better than doing a matching blue would. Okay, so that's how you pin one of the gathered edges. For one of these side edges that are straight, because we started off with this being 19 inches tall and the backing is 18 inches tall, there will be some extra fabric on the sides. So just match up these centers, and I'm going to try to pull all of these tails out so they don't get caught between. Okay, so I am pinning that center, and then I'm just going to ease this and not ease it, but just pin it in between. And if there's some extra fabric, like here, there's a little bit extra, that's fine. When we sew over it, we'll just sew it, make it a little pleat. And I'm going to go ahead and pin all around the rest of this and then get back to the video. Okay, so I've now pinned all the way around this, and I did leave on all these tails until after I baste, then I'll cut them off. So right now I'm going to baste all the way around the outside, and I'm going to sew close to the edge, maybe around 1/4 inch from the edge. Okay, I'm now going to trim off all of these edges. All right, so I've trimmed all the tails off, and I am almost done with this gathered top. You can leave this like this. However, over time, as the pillow gets subject to use, these gathering stitches could snap, and then you would end up having a messed up pillow. So what I like to do is sew over these gathered lines, and this is another reason why you want to use a coordinating thread because you have 2 lines of stitching on each of these lines, but I'm using contrasting thread so you can see it. I'm going to do a little bit longer a little bit longer stitch length than a normal stitch, and I keep tugging on the backing to make sure it doesn't get wrinkled while you can't really see, but I'm pulling on the back of right here, and I'm doing that with one hand and adjusting, holding the gathers down with the other hand. And I want to keep my backing straight and unwrinkled. And I'm just going to I'm going to sew over each one of these, except for these edge ones. Those have already been, you've already basted around the edge, so you don't have to sew over those lines again. I'm also alternating. One side I'll sew this way and the other side I'll turn it around and sew from that side, because as you sew, some of the gathers will get pushed down. I don't want to have them all pushed down the same way. I also notice here that some of my gathers are a little more gathered in some places and less gathered in others. So I'm going to fix these a little bit. Also, if you have less gathering on these sides, if you make it a little more flat right there, that'll be easier on when you're doing the French seams later on. So I don't want to push my gathers way up to the edge. I want to have it a little bit flatter on each of these sides. I forgot to mention to do this earlier because my phone died and I had to restart my video. Okay, so that looks good. I'm going to go back to sewing all of these lines. Now you are done with your gathered pillow top, and you're ready to sew the backing. But if you are doing the pleated pillow, I'm going to show you how to do that next. For your pleat, we're going to fold it lengthwise, match up these raw edges at the top. Oh, and we're folding it with the wrong sides together. Okay, for this next step, you're going to want something to mark where each pleat will be. You can use pins, or you can use some sort of washable marker. I've got these markers that are Frixion markers, and the mark does go away when it's ironed, so I'm going to use that for this. And I'm going to make the same mark at both the top and the bottom. So I'm going to start off with an inch from each side. You will want to have at least an inch here because the seam allowance is about 3/4 of an inch wide or a little more. So make sure you don't have any pleat here. And then I'm going to do 2 inches away. And this will be the first half pleat. And I will do 4 inches, and that's the width of the pleat. Okay. So, oh, it's hard to see my marks. So 2 inches from there, and 2 inches from there, that's another pleat. Then another 4 inches. This is pleat, this is number 2 of 4, so 4 inches. And then 2 2-inch marks. I might have to use my pins for these because it's not showing up very well. All right, so 4 inches, 2 inches, 2 inches. And then another 4 inch. I have a diagram of this in the pattern because that's probably easier than watching this. It probably looks confusing. 2 inches and 2 inches. This is a pleat. Another 4 inches. This is the last pleat. And then on this side there is, oops, another half pleat, so you'll do a 2-inch mark. And then it looks like I ended up with a little more than an inch, so I might have to trim that part off. Yes, because I'm slightly over 34 inches, so I will end up trimming that part off. So now I've got everything marked. And I'm actually going to pin these because I don't think the marks are going to show on the video. Okay, now that I've pinned these, it'll probably be easier for you to see. So an inch from the side, and then half of a pleat, which would be 2 inches, and then a 4-inch gap. 2, 2, 4, 2, 2, 4, 2, 2, 4, 2, and then an inch at the end. Okay, so I'm going to show you how to iron that. So these are both exactly the same, so just pick one to be your top. And I'm going to take these pins and I'm going to make them meet. Oops, sorry. They have to meet with the pleat this direction so that this part has no pleat near the seam. Okay, so I am going to press this. Watch your fingers. And I am going to pin both the top and the bottom. The reason being that these pleats will otherwise just kind of float free while you're sewing, and that'll help keep them in place. Okay, so when you have a group of 3 like this, you'll pleat them together. So you can see why I marked both the top and the bottom so I can get even pleats. And you have to be careful that you don't pull your first side. You want to keep them both pleated nicely. And I will pin the bottom. If you have sewing clips, those also work really well. Okay. And then I'm just going to keep on pleating each of these places where there's 3 pins in a row. We'll form a pleat like this. And with one final half pleat on this side. So I'm going to go ahead and press all of these now. Okay, so now my pleat is finished, and it's always good to check the width. It looks like mine is exactly 18 inches wide. If yours is a little short, then just undo any of the pleats that look a little long and pull them out a little bit and re-iron that. But mine looks like it's just right. I'll now show you how to sew the top of the pleated pillow cover. So we have our pleated piece from the last step where we ironed and pinned that. And then we have the top piece, piece B, and the bottom piece, piece C. And we're going to sandwich this pleat in between these. So first I'm going to place it on top of the right side of piece B, because I want this side of the pleats to be facing up. Then I will take my piece, so that's piece C, and this is piece B, and I have folded it so the right side is facing the right side of the other pieces, and I'm going to sandwich this in the middle. And first I'm going to pin the corners. And then the middle. I'll use the pins I already have. If you have sewing clips, they work well for these thicknesses too. So now that we've sewn these together, we're going to sew it with, or we've pinned these together, we're going to sew it with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Now this seam will be on the inside of the pillow cover, but unless we finish it somehow, then it will just continue to unravel on the inside. And if you ever wash it, it'll make a mess. So you can either serge the edges or zigzag them, or I'm going to show you how to do how to enclose the edges. Now this is just a quick and easy way to do it. So I am going to cut the seam allowance of the top piece and the pleated piece, but I'm going to leave this bottom seam, the seam allowance for the bottom piece, intact. So the rest of it I'm going to cut to half the width, or a little more. I will trim it fairly close. Of course, this would be easier if I weren't using eyelet fabric that has little pieces of the fabric cut out. But like I said before, this fabric matches my curtains. It's also why my fronts and backs don't match, because I only had a small amount of this fabric left. So I used it for the front of the pillow covers, and the back I used a gray fabric that should match my paint. Okay, so your seam is longer in the back. And I'm just going to wrap it around. Oh, I might have to cut this part a little shorter. Now this worked very well with my test piece, but that was an eyelet, so we'll see. I hope I don't embarrass myself and have this not work. So I'm going to wrap this around to enclose the other seams. Now, of course, there will still be a raw edge showing, but then when we top stitch it in the next step, that raw edge will be covered up. So I'm just going to sew this a little bit longer stitch length, because this is getting kind of thick. And I will wrap my fabric around. I think for this fabric I should have serged it instead of trying to do this version, but I really wanted to show you instead of just having it on the written pattern. I'm just sewing on the seam allowance itself. It's a little thick here. I should have cut it a little shorter, which I can't now, so I'll just do my best. Okay, so you can see how the seam is covered up. There's still the raw edge showing of the piece that we pulled over. So Now I'm going to top stitch from this side. And if you serged or zigzagged this seam, you're going to also do the same thing. You're going to put this top piece upward, and I'm going to make sure I'm doing a longer stitch to top stitch, and I'm going to stitch this in place. For top stitching, I usually pick somewhere between an 1/8 of an inch or 1/4 of an inch, depending on how big my seam is underneath. Whatever number you choose. For instance, I often choose right in the middle at 3/16. Whatever distance you choose, just keep it consistent. They even have top stitching feet if you have a hard time keeping that distance consistent. Now with the enclosing seam trick that I did, now the seam on the back is folded up and it covers the last bit of the raw seam completely up, so it's all enclosed, and if it gets washed, nothing will unravel. See, that's what it looks like on the back. Of course, the easier method is just to zigzag it. So if you're brand new to sewing, I would just zigzag it and then top stitch it. And that looks nice. Now I'm also going to baste this edge down so that this part of the pleat is not hanging free and getting in the way in the future steps. You'll notice I still have these pleats pinned. I'm going to keep them pinned, though these edge ones I'm going to pin a little bit away from the seam allowance so I don't get these sewn into the seam allowance on accident, which I have done before, and it is really annoying. And we'll move on to the back, which is the same for both versions. I'm going to show you how to iron your backing hems. Take the longer side, and we will be turning it 1 inch and then 1 inch again to make sure the seam is enclosed. So I like using one of these 6-inch seam gauges. And then I turn it another inch. This time I don't need to use my ruler, I just fold it and press it. I'm going to start in the center. And that is ready to be top stitched. And now I'm going to repeat the same thing with the other side. All right, we're now going to sew the back. Get both of your back pieces, which have been ironed. And we are going to top stitch them down. Now, if you are very beginner, you can always stitch from this side too. You can make sure that you are stitching not going over the edge. My machine looks, my front top stitches are always a little bit nicer looking than my back stitches, so I prefer to stitch from the top. And I'm going to go about 3/4 from the edge, or 7/8, as long as you are not going so far that you accidentally sew beyond the edge of the fabric underneath. And I'm going to top stitch this. When I top stitch, I do a little bit longer stitch than normal stitches. I'm sewing at a 3.5 right now. check to make sure you didn't go over the, to make sure you stayed on the folded part. And then repeat with the second one. All right, now that these are stitched, we're going to overlap them. They should be overlapping about 6 inches. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to my cutting mat and put it on the mat and make sure that it is 18 inches exactly in width, and then I'm going to pin them in place. All right, so these have been pinned together, and now I'm going to baste them together to make one piece. Do that on both sides. All right, we're now done with our back, which is the same for either variety. And I'm going to move on forward, showing you how to sew the front and the backs together using the pleated version, but it's the same between the pleated and gathered versions. Okay, so for the next step, I've gone ahead and pinned this already, but what you're going to do is you're going to take your front and your back, and you're going to pin them wrong sides together. So normally we sew things right sides together, and then we sew it and turn it inside out. Well, in this case, we're doing a French seam. The French seam is a little bit different. It's a way of enclosing the seam. So we are sewing wrong sides together. So we're going to sew all the way around. I'm going to use a 3/8 inch seam allowance. With this pleated version, you could get away with a smaller seam allowance here, and 1/4 inch seam allowance, but I chose 3/8 because with the gathered version, there's so many little pieces on the side, and you don't want raw edges of that to get crinkled in. So I did 3/8 of an inch to be fair, or to be safe. But when you're done with this, you're going to go around and trim everything shorter, and that helps does two things. It makes it shorter, so in the next step, the pieces of the seam don't get stuck in our second seam, and it cuts away all the little raggedy extra bits of fabric that show up while you're working with fabrics that fray. Okay, now we've sewn all the way around, and we're going to trim off the seam, and I'm going to trim it to half its width, like that, all the way around. And especially for the gathered version, because it's thicker, you can do a little snip at the corners. But this version, you don't want to get too close to that corner, because you don't want to, there still needs to be some fabric. Okay, so we've sewn all the way around one time. And now we go through the envelope back. We turn this right side, or it was right side out. We're going to turn it inside out. Now I have something called a point turner, and it is perfect for pushing these little points out. You can use a chopstick, or I've used scissors before as long as they were a little blunter. Ouch, I forgot I had pins on the inside. Poked myself. Okay. We are now going to sew around, sorry, I just kicked my camera. We're going to sew all the way around this one more time. And we're going to sew with a 3/8 inch seam allowance again. Now what I often do when I'm sewing this is I stick my finger inside. I stick my hand inside and I use it to poke out these sides to make sure I have them all the way, make sure there's not folds like this. You don't want to accidentally sew more of the pillow on the inside or on the outside. So. This is a lot of layers on the gathered version, so just take it slow if you need to. It's easier on this pleated version. But there still are some places with more layers, so just make sure that you have the edges all square. And I can feel on the inside where the pleat is and where I've folded away, but if you haven't, just put your hand on the inside and make sure that it's not going to be, you're not going to be sewing the pleat into the seam. Now this part right here is going to be a place in the seam where it'll get more stress from the pillow pulling right here. So I generally go forward and back across that section just to make sure it's that it's strong enough there. Now the French seam is nice because it makes sure that all the seams are covered up. Even though it feels like double the work when you could just serge or zigzag that inside seam. But I feel like it's a nice strong seam for something that if it's in my house, it'll get lots of rough handling. But the nice thing about these edges is these also look nice on the outside of the pillow. So if you ever, it doesn't, I didn't do it with this style because I didn't think it would look good. But if you have just a plain pillow like this that you want to do with an envelope back and French seams, you can do it the opposite with the, first you would put it right sides together and then switch it wrong sides together. And so this, I think it's called a flange. This flange. This edge would be on the outside. And I've done that before and it's a nice look. You can also make it very wide for a wide flange. Man, that's one of those words that you see but don't hear. So I have some pillows on my bed that I did that wide edge on and it looks really nice. So I just made it the exact same way, but Instead of sewing wrong sides together first, I sewed right sides, and I just had to account for that wide edge in my calculations. I tell you, pillow easy. These sorts of pillows, just envelope pillows, you just have to get your math correct. I always draw a little diagram. Okay, now we're going to turn this right side out again. And you might be thinking that this is kind of, especially on the gathered version that has so much fabric, you might be thinking, this is really thick to have in a corner. Normally we trim off corners so that they don't get thick. But if you think about how a throw pillow is, the corner of the throw pillow is often very, it's not very thick there. It's just like this little tiny corner piece. So it's okay that there's extra thickness in these corners. All right, I will turn this right side out and poke all these corners out as much as I can. Ouch, I got hit by a pin again. I really should have used sewing clips instead of pins. Okay, so I am done. I just need to stuff the pillow, and I'm going to take the pins out for this pleated version. So all I have to do now is stuff the pillow. I generally go around the outside and make sure that I didn't have any of the first seams stick through, because if so, I might have to trim some pieces off. But the whole reason we trimmed it short after we sewed the first seam was so that hopefully nothing would poke through. Oh, I've got one little thread here. And that's all. So now I'm going to stuff the pillow. Okay, I'm now going to show you how to stuff the pillow insert in. This one is already done. You can see it's fairly full. If you don't want your pillow to be this fluffy, then you probably will want to make all of your dimensions just a little bit bigger. Also on the back, this is why I have a 6-inch overlap, is because it does pull. If you don't like that look, I have some pillows where I will put a couple of buttons on the back. And then that also looks nice if they're if they turn backwards on the couch, because they've got some decorative buttons. They're not decorative, they're functional buttons. Okay, so I've got my 18-inch pillow cover. I'm going to stuff it in. I mentioned the corners. Make sure you take the corner of the pillow cover and stuff it into the corner of this, because otherwise you don't want it to look too floppy there. And then we've got it in halfway, and this is where we will push it down and pull the other end of the pillow. And I'm stuffing that corner up there. And this corner right there. And then I just readjust everything. Make sure that the edge of the envelope on the inside is not folded back. And there you go. Your pillow is finished. And if you did both styles, you've got some pretty decorative pillows to add to your couches or your bed. Torment your spouse with and your kids. Thank you for attending my Sewing Summit class. I hope you enjoyed making these 2 pillow covers and learned some new skills that you can use in your sewing journey. You can go to my website at toriska.com and find all of my sewing patterns. I specialize in bag patterns, and I hope you find something that you like. Thanks.